Hello dear students, my name is Raichu Samuel. I am an old student of Crossland College and I am happy to be here to take you through the chapter on strategic management. Before we dive deep into the chapter, let's take a look at the syllabus or the topics that we are going to cover in this chapter. We begin with what exactly strategic management is, followed by the classes of decision involved in strategic management and the characteristics of each one of them. Then the process of strategic management, followed by the benefits and limitations. Let us understand what exactly strategic management is all about. Simply put, it is the ongoing planning, monitoring, analysis, and assessment of all that is necessary for an organization to meet its goals and objectives. Now, every organization has got its own goals and objectives. Strategic management is a tool or a means or a way through which these goals and objectives are attained. An organization consists of different departments. You have the accounts, the marketing, the HR, the business development, the commercial, the operations, so many departments functioning. The purpose or the role of strategic management is to bring together all these various departments into one unified or focused effort to achieve superior performance. Now, if your company is able to perform well, is able to give superior performance, it means that you have a better standing in the market, which means that you have better sales and you will be gaining better profits, which means that at the end of the day, your company is going to have a competitive advantage over other companies in the market. One thing that we need to realize is that strategic management is not the prediction of the future. It's about how you plan, how the company plans or comes up with steps in order to meet whatever the future has in hold for the company. To better understand this, let's divide the topic of strategic management into 4 questions. The first question being, what exactly does the future hold in store for the company? Understanding what sort of technologies that might come in the future. What is the competition going to be like in the future? That is understanding the future of the market or the world globally. The second question is, where is our company or our organization at the moment? How well are we performing? Do we have the innovation department who are capable of innovating and coming up with new products? Do we have the marketing research team who can do a market research to understand how we can improve and meet those demands 5 years from now? The third question is, where does it want to go? Where does your company want to go from here? You make a business plan, understanding where your company is right now and also understanding what the future has in store. And finally, how are we going to get there? What are the steps that you're actually going to take to reach that particular goal that the company has taken for itself? This is where all the departments are actually involved. It's not just the top management or the senior management that can take a decision regarding this. It involves every other department within the organization and what each of these departments should do in order to meet that unified objective of the company. For any plan to be successful, it is important for the company to do a SWOT analysis. An analysis of what its strengths are, what are its potential weaknesses, understanding the opportunities, and what are its threats. When you say strengths, it's basically what your company does well. What are those capabilities? What are those things that make you special and different from your competing companies? What are the resources that you have? It could be the people, it could be the technology, it could be the knowledge of the stuff. You could have so many such things that make you stand out from its competitors. Secondly, understanding what are the weaknesses that your company currently has. What does your company lack? What does your competitor have that you do not have? So understanding of all these weaknesses is important, because strategic management involves making plans for meeting the demands of the future. Only if you're able to overcome these weaknesses will you be able to meet the demands of the future. The third thing is understanding the opportunities. What is the market for a specific product? Can you expand to a new location? Which is the location which has fewer competitors? And which particular market has a need for the product that you're going to introduce? So understanding the opportunities that the market has. And finally, another important thing is understanding the threat that your company has. Who are the major competitions that the company has? Are there any new companies that are emerging who could be potential competitors with maybe a new technology? Keeping up to date with governmental regulations, environmental regulations, local regulations which could affect your business. Is there any sort of negative news that has come about the company in the newspapers or any national media? And also important is understanding the consumer behavior. The consumer behavior keeps changing. It's not very static. So understanding the consumer behavior is also equally important. Let us take the example of few companies that fail to see the role of strategic management and how important strategic management is to the success of a company. The first example is that of Kodak. Kodak was a company that was established in the 1880s by George Eastman. In the 1950s, the company had grown to such a huge proportion that it had 70% of the market share. It had a very vast, wide distribution network, had amazing profits, and it was one of the strongest brands in the world. It dominated its industry. Earlier, photography was a thing that was reserved for a few who had or who knew how to photograph. They used to carry around expensive and huge pieces of equipment, sometimes multiple pieces of equipment for photography. But with the invention of the film camera, Kodak changed that perception completely. It made cameras accessible to everyone, to families, to women, to capture the precious moments. Kodak's high-profile advertising campaign established the need to preserve significant occasions such as family events and holidays. These were labeled as Kodak moments. You would have probably heard of it, a concept that sort of became a part of everyday life. This also involved clicking of the pictures, printing of the pictures, and preserving of the pictures. In the 1980s came the digital age, digital revolution. At this point, Kodak was still focused on its old film camera technology rather than coming out with any breakthrough inventions in the digital technology. The leadership did not have a clear vision or consistency. They failed to see the change in technology. They also failed to see the change in consumer behavior. With the coming of digital cameras, people would not be bothered about printing the images and storing them. When you could share it actually share it through mobile phones or even put it up in Facebook and other social media, printing had sort of lost its significance. From preserving memories to sharing experience, the concept of photography was completely changed. That is how Kodak had to finally shut its door, because it failed to see what the digital age held in store for it and to make inventions or innovations so that they could meet up to this technology. The second example that we are going to look into is that of Jet Airways. At one point in time, Jet Airways was the biggest and the most successful airlines in India. With the rapidly expanding aviation market and more people choosing air travel as their primary mode of reaching their destination, it looked like Jet Airways was destined for success. They have over 120 aircraft flying to as many as 1,000 destinations worldwide. Jet Airways looked like a company that was here to stay. But unfortunately, it had to file for bankruptcy. Now, let's take a look into the reasons why it had to file for bankruptcy. The first reason is attributed to its costly purchase of Air Sahara in 2005 for USD 500 million, which experts view as a really high payment. They rebranded Air Sahara into Jet Light and launched. Unfortunately, it did not make any profits and they had to write off their entire investment in 2015. Another reason for their failure is their inability to see how popular the budget airlines were going to become. In between 2005 and 2007, Indigo, SpiceJet, and GoAir emerged as hugely popular budget airlines. They were offering customer cut price fares and were also previously flying flights on unreserved routes. Jet Airways failed to take them seriously. Jet Airways stated that they catered to corporate passengers, and they failed to recognize that low-cost carriers were actually attracting customers who were more price sensitive. Another reason is attributed to their management model. They had one single management headed by the founder Naresh Goyal himself, who was handling all the operations of Jet Airways. Analysts say that had he had two separate teams, that was one that was running the full service carrier and the other one taking care of budget flyers, maybe the management model would have been more successful and would have been able to meet the demand of the times. Another important reason for their failure is their poor people management. Once they were running into loss, they decided to fire a lot of their staff. This did not go well with the people and they started protesting in the streets. That is when they had to rehire all their staff. This did not go very well with the employees nor with the market. So these are the few reasons why Jet Airways had to file for bankruptcy. This also shows the role of strategic management. Had Jet Airways considered the future, considered steps to mitigate the risk, they would not have reached the position they are in today. The last example that we would be looking at is that of Nokia. Nokia was a company that was leading in the mobile phone sector for a very long period of time. Every person you look around at one point in time had a Nokia phone in their hand. Nokia was the only known brand, and mobile phones had become synonymous with the name Nokia. But that changed. Nokia was not able to see the coming of the Android, the smartphones. They failed to realize that the software that they were using or the technology that they were using was outdated and very inferior to that of Apple or any other smartphones. They failed to see the change in technology, the change in softwares, and adapt something new that could appeal to the market. They were also afraid that their consumers who already had their products would not like it if they introduced changes. Another reason that is attributed to their failure is the arrogance or the lack of vision among the top managers. The top executives were afraid of losing their investors, suppliers, and customers if they acknowledged their inferior technology. and the top managers often intimidated the middle managers by accusing them of not being ambitious enough to develop anything. And the middle management was scared of telling the truth to the top management for the fear of being fired. The messed up levels of management, improper communication, no transparency, lack of vision are the reasons that led to the failure of Nokia. Moving on, let's take a look at the classes of decision and the characteristics of each one of them. There are three classes of decision. The first one is the strategic production plan. The second, the tactical production plan. And the third is the operational level production plan. Let's consider the pyramid given in the slide as an organization. You can see the strategic production plan at the top, which means that it is the top management, the senior level management, that is responsible for the strategic production plan. The strategic production plan is generally long-term, made for 5 years, to achieve the goal in the best way possible. The tactical production plan is done by the people at the middle level of the middle management team. It's for medium term, around 2 to 3 years. And finally is the operational level production plan, which is done at the operational level or the lower level. It's mainly for short-term or routine decisions or activities or plans that are made for the day-to-day activities. Strategic production plan is a process by which the organization decides its overall strategy, allocates its resources to achieve competitive advantage, finds out its strengths, eliminates its weakness, and lead in the direction that the company will follow to achieve its objectives. The tactical level production plan actually takes the strategic production plan and divides it into different activities for short-term action and plans to achieve these objectives in order to contribute towards the overall strategic production plan. The last one is the operational level production plan. This refers to the action plan for the day-to-day activities of an organization, day-to-day functioning of an organization. It defines the short-term methods to achieve the strategic objectives set in order to achieve the strategic plan of the organization. Let's take the example of any airline. Before an airline departs from a particular airport, it needs to have a final destination. The takeoff time should be decided, the landing time needs to be decided, the direction needs to be decided, the flight path has to be charted out, any connecting airports will have to be listed. That is exactly how strategic planning is done. If we take this into a bigger perspective of an airline company when it's deciding its strategic plan, it would be for a long-term period of 5 years. Let's say 2020 to 2025. So when they are making a plan for the next 5 years, they would look into a lot of aspects like, do they have to introduce new routes, new destinations? If they introduce new destinations, how many other passengers or the customers expected towards these destinations? What would be the air traffic? If there is more, do we have to introduce new flights? Do we have to buy new flights? If we buy a new fleet, what should we go for? Should we go for an Airbus or should we go for a Boeing? In case we buy new flights, we would require to increase the number of pilots and the air crew that we have. Accordingly, the ground staff also needs to be increased. So all these things form the strategic production plan. Now, what the people at the middle level will do is take the strategic production plan and divide it into various departments, or let's say functional activities. Now, if there is a decision to increase the routes, the business development department along with the marketing department would determine what are the new routes the flight is going to fly in. Once the routes are decided and the number of flights in those particular routes are decided, the commercial department can take a decision on the number of flights to purchase. They get the best quotes from different vendors. Say, you want to go for a Boeing or you want to go for an Airbus. They get the best possible quotes and pass it on to and find out what's the best possible cost it can be bought in and pass it on to purchase department to make the purchase. Now, if the purchase department has to make a purchase, the finance department has to provide them with a budget. So the finance department takes into account the performance of the organization, the profits that the company has made, the balance, how does the balance sheet look like, and then take a decision on what would be the budget for buying a new airline flight. Now, if new flights are brought, obviously you would need new pilots and crew for that. So the HR department has to take a decision on hiring the pilots and the rest of the crew required. So this is the tactical production plan. Now moving on to the operational level production plan. When it comes to the purchase department, they'll have to decide on when the purchase needs to be made, what are the documents that are required for the purchase before giving them the request for making the purchase. The finance department has to make the payment. They decide on what are the documents necessary for making the payment. How will the payment be made? Is it going to be a bank transfer? Is it going to be a check? When will the payment be made? All these are the day-to-day activities. The HR department has to make a decision on how the pilot hiring is going to be done. How are they going to post the job advertisement? How are the interviews going to be conducted? Who is going to conduct the interviews? Where is the interview going to be conducted? Are we going to have a technical assessment? Are we going to have a test? Are we going to have a behavioral assessment? How are these things going to be done? At the operational level, they have to take into account the increased number of flights. So how will the operations manage the increase in the flight routes? So all the day-to-day activities are determined by the people at the operational level. So once again, let's take a look at the characteristics of all the classes of decisions which we have mostly covered. So the strategic production plan, like I mentioned earlier, it's a long-term plan for 5 years. It's for achieving the goals in the best possible way. It is for achieving a competitive advantage over the other companies in the market. A strategic plan is developed understanding what is the strength, what are the weakness, and trying to eliminate that weakness. It's actually the direction for the business to grow. This is the way the business is expected to grow. The strategic plan is very critical to the success or failure of a business. Like we saw in a few previous examples. Kodak, they did not have a proper strategic plan, which is why their business failed. Had they had a better one, taking into account all the technology, everything that was going to change in the future, they would have made a better strategic plan and they would have succeeded. The strategic production plan also takes into account the risks associated. Moving on to the tactical production plan. Like we discussed earlier, it's for a medium term, 2 to 3 years. It's done by the people at the middle management. It actually fixes the performance parameters. Find out what is the expected level of performance, what are the gaps, and how to mitigate these gaps, how to come up with plans to close these gaps. What are the resources that we currently have and utilizing it in the best way possible, and ensure that resources are available for utilization. And finally, the operational level production plan. It's short term for routine decision, day-to-day activities. The plans are definite and action oriented. It gives detailed instruction as to what is to be done, when is to be done, how it is to be done. It's always expressed in some measurable units. Say 30 pilots have to be hired, or 1 million is the budget for purchasing this. So things like that, it's given specifically. The operational level production plan progress is what helps in monitoring where you stand in your plan at the moment. So as you can see from the pyramid, the operational level production plan, the tactical level production plan, ultimately contributes to the achievement of the strategic level production plan. Before we look into the process of strategic management, let us understand why strategic management fails sometimes. Most of the companies have a strategic plan. So the failure is not because the company does not have a strategic plan. It is because the strategic plan is often not communicated to the employees. So one, the workforce is not aware of the strategic plan. If they are not aware of the strategic plan, how do you expect the workforce to implement it? The second thing, the plan is often not linked to the budget of the company. The third, a lot of effort has been taken to make the plan, but there is no guidance on how to execute the plan. The fourth reason why strategic management fails is because the top executives, they spend a lot of time in deciding the plan, but not enough time in discussing the strategy, the evaluating it, monitoring it, finding out what the current status is. So these are a few of the reasons why strategic management fails, which is where the importance of the process comes into play. The first step is goal setting. Goal setting, as the name suggests, is setting the goals, making people aware of what exactly the goal is so that they can put in their efforts, they understand their role, and they can put in their efforts to achieve these goals. The second one is analysis. Now for analysis, data needs to be collected, problem areas need to be identified, opportunities, threats, etc. need to be identified. So once this is identified, you will be able to interpret the data that's collected, which will help in the next step, which is the strategy formulation. Now, the third step, the strategy formulation, is the most important step. This is where you come up with the strategy, develop the strategy based on the information that you have gathered in the previous step in the analysis. The fourth step is the implementation of the strategy. Now you have a strategy in hand. It has been formulated. What is important is to implement the strategy. So when you implement the strategy, who are the people involved in it, the employees? They need to be made aware of what their strategy is, what their role is, and they are the ones who can put the strategy into action. Finally, the last step is the strategy evaluation. Strategy evaluation is nothing but monitoring the progress of the strategy once it's implemented. Finding out whether all the plans are happening according to the timelines that are set. Finding out if there is any gap. If there is a gap or if there is a delay, how that can be mitigated and so that the strategy implementation can move forward. So it's a very important step. The last step is a very important step that shows where your strategic management process stands right now. Are you going to be successful, or is there some hindrance? If there is a hindrance, how you will be able to negate the hindrance. Finally, we are on the benefits and limitations of the strategic management process. Over the previous few slides, we have understood what strategic management is, what is the importance of strategic management, and have also understood the reasons for the failure of some companies because they did not have a proper strategic plan. So let's look into the benefits of the strategic management process for the organization. First of all, it's the identification, prioritization, and exploitation of opportunities. This process helps the company identify what are the opportunities that are available, prioritize them from most important to least important, and make use of these available opportunities, grab these opportunities and use them at the right time. The second point is the objective view of the management problem. In the process of analysis, we are able to find out what is the management problems and come up with solutions to objectively meet this problem. The third point is planning. The strategic plan improves the coordination and control. Planning is ultimately the first step. When you have a proper plan, there is a means by which You can ensure proper coordination and proper control of the activities. The fourth point is effective allocation of time and resources. When you have a proper strategic management process in place, you know what are the activities for which the resources and time needs to be dedicated on. There is a clear-cut understanding. The strategic management process, the success of strategic management process depends upon the communication within the organization. So it improves internal communication. The execution of the process requires that the details be communicated properly so that individuals are aware of what their roles and responsibilities are, and their individual responsibilities are clarified, as is mentioned in the next point. Strategic management also encourages a very forward-thinking company. Now, strategic management is a process that takes into account what lies in the future and preparing yourself or preparing your company to sustain whatever they might face. There could be technological changes in environmental or government regulations. So a forward-thinking company is able to understand what are these changes and and come up with steps to meet these changes or sustain during these changes. It encourages an attitude towards change. Change is the only thing that is constant. Things change at a very rapid pace. So it's important that the companies change accordingly to meet the demands of the situation. So this process ensures or encourages the company to adopt such an attitude towards change, a positive attitude towards change, a willingness to change, because they know exactly what are the changes that lie ahead of them. Let's move on to the limitations. The first one is that it is a complex process. The strategic management, it's a very continuous process. It's a very lengthy process. It can become complex since it requires a lot of patience and time from the management in order to have this implemented. The implementation requires a strong managerial team. If there is no strong managerial team, the implementation can be a difficult task. It's a time-consuming process. A lot of people have to dedicate a lot of time to ensure the success of this implementation. There are a lot of activities that would require day-to-day attention. If the management cannot devote enough time, then the strategic management process is sure to fail, which may be the situation in some cases because of the complexity involved and the time involved. The implementation is tough. That is the third point. Sometimes making the plan is more easier than actually executing or implementing the plan. If you need to implement the plan, it needs to be communicated properly to the people. Sometimes the communication is not perfect. Employees do not understand what they are supposed to do. Hence, the resources are not properly utilized, and ultimately, the strategic management process fails. So with this, we have come to the end of the strategic management chapter. Hope you understood whatever was being taught in the last few slides. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm glad I could be of help.